In a quiet Pennsylvania town, whispers still linger about an old house built at the end of the 19th century. Beneath its creaking wooden floors lies a bottomless cellar, where darkness swallows every trace of light. Those who dared to descend never returned. Only the echo of footsteps remains, repeating endlessly through the night. The house has changed owners many times, but no one has ever stayed for long. Now, a middle-aged man has moved in, clinging to the hope of a fresh start, unaware that the darkness has been waiting for him. And soon, Arthur turned off the main road just as dusk settled over the town. Autumn in Pennsylvania hung heavy in the air, damp, cold, and pressing down on everything, even his thoughts. The house waited at the bottom of the hill, a hulking shape of darkened timber, its roof sagging beneath the weight of age, its windows rotted and hollow like empty eyes staring into the void. The moment Arthur pushed open the door, he was swallowed by the smell of mildew and rotting wood. The hinges wailed in protest, a long metallic groan, like something grieving. The ceiling loomed high but shrouded in shadow, draped with cobwebs that fell like curtains. The floorboards groaned underfoot, each step echoing far too loudly for the size of the room, as if the house were hollow inside and slowly devouring every sound. He followed a narrow corridor where weak light seeped through dust-streaked windows, revealing peeling paint and dark stains creeping along the walls. The rooms lay abandoned, furniture cloaked in sheets, the chill sinking into his skin. The farther he walked, the heavier the air became, thick and suffocating, as though the house itself breathed at a slower, alien rhythm. At the end of the hallway, he noticed a door smaller than the rest. When he pulled it open, a yawning darkness stared back. A steep wooden staircase plunged downward, its steps slick and blackened with damp. From below drifted a breath of air, cold, earthy, smelling of stone and decay, carrying with it the sense of something endless. Arthur froze, his heartbeat pounding. He snatched a lantern from the hall, its yellow flame trembling as he lowered it toward the stairs. The light reached only the first few steps before being consumed by shadow. The silence below was oppressive, as though even sound refused to exist there. An inexplicable pull urged him forward. Arthur placed his foot on the first step. The wood groaned sharply. Then the sound died into nothing. He descended further, the lantern flickering, casting light on stone walls, slick with moisture. The deeper he went, the thicker the dark became, as if some enormous hand were closing around the space itself. Suddenly, he stopped. A chill threaded its way up his spine, an instinctive warning he couldn't ignore. He lifted his gaze downward and saw only a vast black pit with no end. The lantern flame sputtered, dimmed, and nearly died, leaving him stranded in a suffocating abyss. Heart racing. Arthur turned back and climbed quickly, his breath ragged. When the cellar door shut behind him, the sound reverberated through the house, like the heavy exhale of something ancient and waiting in the dark. He did not know that, with that single step, he had awakened what had been patient for more than a century. Nay, Awims down, deep. The first night in the old house dragged on like a trial. Arthur lay on the sagging wooden bed, the thin blanket useless against the chill that seeped from the floorboards and stone walls. Outside, the wind hissed through cracks in the shutters, but it could not mask another sound, rising from the depths below. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, as though someone were climbing the cellar stairs, one creaking step at a time. Each groan of wood reverberated through the silence, too precise, too human to dismiss. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, telling himself it was only the timbers settling in the night's cold. But the rhythm was undeniable. He tossed and turned until dawn, when at last the sound dissolved, as if it had never been there. The next morning, Arthur buried himself in chores to shake the unease. He dusted old tables, flung open the windows, let sunlight flood the rooms, yet no matter how bright the day, the house remained damp and clammy. Out in the yard, he caught the gaze of an elderly neighbor standing motionless, cane in hand, watching. The wrinkled face gave no sign of feeling, only lingering too long on the half-open cellar door before turning away. That wordless glance etched itself into Arthur's mind like a silent warning. On the second night, the sounds returned. This time, they began faintly, as if from some unreachable depth. The measured rhythm struck through bone, louder and longer than before. Arthur sat upright, his pulse racing, listening. The footsteps climbed higher, step by step, then stopped just beyond the cellar door. He held his breath, his body rigid with terror. A dead hush followed. Then breathing, heavy, ragged, pressing against the wood. It crawled into his ears, hot and wet, until his skin prickled. Candle in hand, Arthur crept to the hallway. His legs trembled. The flame quivered with each of his own breaths. When his fingers brushed the icy iron handle, the sound cut off at once. He cracked the door open. Nothing. Only a slab of black silence, thick and endless. Yet a blast of frigid air rushed past him, reeking of damp earth and something faintly metallic, almost bloody. He slammed the door shut and leaned against it, heart hammering, listening to the suffocating quiet pressing in from every wall. The days that followed unraveled into fragments. Each night, the footsteps came back. Sometimes near, sometimes far, sometimes slow, sometimes hurried. Never the same, never predictable. On the longest nights, they endured until morning, leaving Arthur hollow-eyed with exhaustion. The house itself became a chamber of echoes, bending every sound into warped reflections of something colder, crueler. And then, the house began to change. Window frames rattled, though the air outside was still. The walls seemed to flex, expanding and contracting with some uncanny rhythm. Wherever Arthur stood, the sound of the cellar found him, tapping against his thoughts like the heartbeat of an unseen thing. One storm-heavy night, as rain battered the roof, the footsteps grew louder than ever. Arthur strained to catch the rhythm, and froze as realization pierced him. The cadence was not random at all. It matched his own, the exact pattern of his descent down the cellar steps that first evening. He understood then. The thing below was not simply climbing upward. It was repeating him, mirroring his every step, calling him back. Arthur fled to his room, but the knowledge gnawed at him. The darkness beneath the cellar had begun to learn his rhythm, and each night it drew closer. Daylight no longer brought comfort. For Arthur, each morning opened only into a hollow stretch of waiting until night. He woke with a gaunt face, eyes ringed in bruised shadows from sleepless hours. Daily routines fell away. Instead, he sat for long stretches in the hallway, eyes fixed on the cellar door, as though it might vanish if he dared to look elsewhere. The staircase seemed to possess its own pull, an invisible gravity. Whenever Arthur closed his eyes, he found himself placing a foot on the first step, hearing the drawn-out groan of wood that never ended. Each night, the footsteps returned, calling him downward. Fatigue, insomnia, and mounting tension twisted into something like addiction. He had to know what waited below. One afternoon, unable to resist, Arthur lit a lantern and opened the door. A rush of cold air surged up, carrying the sour breath of rotting earth. He began to descend, counting each step. 12, 25, 40. The numbers climbed rapidly, but no solid ground appeared. Only darkness thickening around him. He pressed on, shirt damp with sweat, heart battering his ribs. When he finally lifted the lantern, its glow revealed nothing more than a damp wall of stone, water dripping with the slow, steady pulse of a heartbeat. The staircase stretched endlessly downward, no end in sight. The thought of having walked hundreds of steps made his skin crawl. Dizzy, he turned and climbed back up. Yet it took only minutes to return to the door, as though the impossible distance had folded in on itself. Arthur collapsed on the floor, chest heaving. The logic of space had broken. The staircase stretched and contracted at will, a trap that twisted time and distance alike. It did not lead simply into darkness. It bent reality to its own hunger. From that day, Arthur changed. He nearly lived by the cellar door, chair pressed close to the threshold, straining to catch every faint sound rising from below. Outside, the town carried on in the crisp chill of autumn. But inside, time stalled. The air thickened. Silence pressed close like a suffocating fog. One afternoon, a knock came. A tall, severe-faced town inspector stepped inside, moving through the rooms with a notebook, his presence filling the house with uneasy scrutiny. Arthur followed, heart pounding, terrified the man might touch the cellar door. But the inspector left without approaching it, leaving Arthur alone again with the waiting dark. Afterward, the footsteps changed. No longer slow, no longer patient. They grew rapid, frantic, like someone running, always chasing upward from some unseeable depth. Arthur sat entranced, listening for hours, until the rhythm began to sync with his own racing pulse. One night, he gave in. He opened the door and sat on the first step, lantern quivering in his hand. The echoes swarmed, pressing from every angle, impossible to distinguish from his own fevered thoughts. The darkness below swelled, crawling up the steps like a tide of black water. Arthur closed his eyes and saw himself descending forever, never turning back. The staircase had bewitched him, tightening its grip with every hour, every night. The haunting was no longer outside him. It had nested within. Arthur could no longer tell whether he chose to obey or was compelled by something older, deeper. The staircase had become part of him, and he knew, next time, he would not escape. Now, Inuini. The days drifted by in a haze. Arthur gazed at himself in the dust-covered hallway mirror, and the first thing that chilled him to the bone was the eyes. The thing in the mirror stared back at him longer than it should, as if there were a delay. When Arthur tilted his head, the reflection moved more slowly, its eyes faintly glowing with a light that did not belong to him. From that day, the reflection began to reveal subtle differences. Sometimes it smiled faintly while his real face remained expressionless. Sometimes the arm in the mirror moved sluggishly, as if trying to reach out. At night, when candlelight cast shadows on the walls, Arthur noticed that the figure in the reflection stood still when he walked, then vanished entirely for a fleeting moment, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. The whispers from the basement grew louder. At first, they were only indistinct murmurs, but then they became clearer, stretching his name in a heavy rhythm. The walls of the house seemed to pulse like living flesh, with cold air seeping through every crack. The windows were gradually consumed by darkness until daylight was reduced to a thin, pale layer that could no longer penetrate inside. One evening, when Arthur looked out into the yard, he saw his old neighbor stooping beside the fence. In the blink of an eye, a shadowy figure dragged the man toward the basement stairs, vanishing as if it had never been there. Arthur rushed out but found only emptiness, and the basement door stood ajar, trembling faintly as though someone had just touched it. Arthur's mind began to fracture. He saw himself in the mirror, descending the endless staircase, lantern trembling in his hand, eyes hollow. The image repeated, each time deeper, darker, until one night the reflection no longer followed him. Instead, it stood waiting on the 10th step, turning back with a face identical to Arthur's, but with a void-like gaze, as if inviting him. Arthur felt his body compelled forward. The house was silent, the air thick, every door tightly shut. The staircase yawned open like the mouth of an abyss. His shadow on the wall had vanished, replaced only by the imposter waiting below. Arthur knew that if he stepped down this time, he would never return. But the flame within his heart no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the basement. Arthur no longer resisted. On the final night, he opened the basement door, letting the cold coil around his body like invisible fingers. The staircase stretched before him, black and infinite. The lantern in his hand trembled, its meager light swallowed by the void, leaving behind shadows that expanded and contracted as if they were breathing. He began to descend. The groan of wood echoed, then dissolved into nothing. Each step sank deeper into his body, transforming into an alien rhythm that no longer belonged to Arthur. From the depths, whispers rose to meet him, merging with his footsteps, forming a ghastly chorus. Time no longer existed. Distance no longer mattered. There was only repetition. Arthur kept descending, counting in his head, but the numbers tangled and slipped away. When he looked up, the stairs still stretched on, endless, without destination. Around him, blurred figures emerged, emaciated, hollow-eyed shades trudging in the same eternal loop. They did not see him. They only continued, trapped like puppets in the punishment of darkness. Arthur realized with sudden horror that the footsteps he had heard night after night were never from another soul. They had always been his own, an echo of himself, bound forever in this warped space, the sound of a destiny already sealed. Panic flared. He tried to turn back, but his legs refused to obey. They carried him downward, steady and unyielding, until his steps blended seamlessly with the eternal echo. The lantern died, plunging him into the infinite pit, where there was no longer a line between man and shadow. By morning, the house was silent. A town inspector stopped by, jotting down notes about a suspicious disappearance. The basement door was closed, dust thick upon it, as though no hand had touched it in years. Arthur was gone without a trace, leaving only the house itself, cold and patient, waiting for the next soul. And at night, those who pass the slope swear they hear sounds rising from beneath the earth, footsteps, slow and deliberate, repeating endlessly, never fading. They say it is Arthur, now part of the basement itself, devoured along with all who dared to gaze into the darkness. Meow. The old silver car swayed along the patchy highway. The driver, Elliot Granger, a young reporter from Chicago, leaned back in his seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Hundreds of miles on the road had left him weary, but more than just sleepiness weighed him down. A strange, creeping feeling stirred in his chest as he neared Harrow's End. Elliot had never imagined this trip would feel like an expedition into a forgotten land. At first, he had laughed when his boss mentioned a town that vanished every harvest season. It sounded like a tall tale, hardly believable. But now, with the withered cornfields stretching on either side of the road, yellow-brown leaves whistling in the wind, and a leaden-gray sky pressing down, he began to doubt himself. When Elliot arrived in town, a faded wooden sign welcomed him. Welcome to Harrow's End. Population 312. Yet the number 312 seemed overwritten, blurred like a stain of blood. He drove past the sign, frowning. Stopping at a dilapidated roadside inn, he received the key from a thin man with a hoarse voice and vacant eyes. No greeting, just a look that seemed to warn Elliot to stay silent. Inside his room, Elliot realized the utter isolation. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, only the wind howling from the cracks. He opened his notebook, jotting down a few lines, deciding he would explore the town in the morning. But on the very first night, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. They didn't open doors, didn't speak, just paused silently outside his room. Elliot held his breath, and then the footsteps vanished into the darkness. He forced a laugh, convincing himself it was just a drunken guest. Yet a sense of unease clung to him. In his dream, Elliot saw empty houses, windows like wide open eyes, and a tall, thin figure wearing a straw hat standing motionless in the cornfield. Waking in a sweat, he realized that Harrow's End was not merely a place for investigation. Something was watching him, patient and unblinking. Now! A morning mist blanketed Harrow's End, draping the empty streets like a funeral shroud. Elliot walked through the town, his eyes catching faint traces of life. An abandoned grocery store, a cash register still holding a few boxes of cereal, a small house with forgotten children's toys, a bicycle leaning by the roadside, coated in rusty dust. Everything was there, but the owners had vanished. Inside the old library, the scent of damp paper filled his nostril. Elliot flipped through dusty newspapers, eyes glued to articles about families disappearing during harvest season or young people wandering into the fields, never to return. One article from 1897 made him shiver. A poor farmer left to die of thirst in the fields, his name printed in the paper, matching Elliot's own last name, Granger. He blinked, telling himself it was only coincidence. Yet the chill crawling down his spine refused to fade. Looking up, he saw a tall, thin figure wearing a straw hat in the field, reflected in the dusty window pane. Elliot rubbed his eyes, looked again. The figure was gone. Only his own pale face remained, blurred within the glass. Night fell, and the inn sank into silence. Heavy footsteps echoed along the hallway, just as they had on the first night. This time, Elliot didn't close the door. He cracked it open to peek. The hallway was empty, lit only by a flickering yellow bulb. The footsteps vanished, but the wind from the window at the far end carried a rustling sound, rhythmic, like invisible hands sweeping across dry leaves. Elliot stepped outside, moving toward the window, staring out into the field. The rows of corn swayed, and a tall, thin figure with a wide straw hat appeared. He raised his camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit the moment. In that brief burst of light, The figure's face emerged. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a solid, oppressive darkness. Looking closer, Elliot recognized trembling shapes within the shadow, faint as if written in smoke. Granger Doughty. His heart froze. The whole town, the harvest season, the family curse. It seemed to have recognized him. No. The second day in Harrow's End began with a thin layer of mist shrouding the town, blurring the empty streets. Elliot stepped out of the inn, a hollow feeling wrapping around him like a heavy cloak. No one was in sight, yet everything bore traces of life. Slightly open windows, scattered children's toys, dusty bicycles resting by the roadside. He made his way to the old library once more. Inside, the shelves were thick with dust, yellowed papers stacked high to the ceiling. Elliot rifled through the records, hands trembling as he turned pages brittle as ash, eyes fixed on names marked with a single chilling word: missing. Hundreds, thousands of names spanning generations, like cracks in time swallowing whole families. Elliot paused over an old 1897 newspaper article. A poor farmer had died in the harvest fields, mouth still clinging to dry earth, eyes wide open, and the man's surname matched his own, Granger. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. Past and present seemed to merge, as if these pages had been waiting for him to open them. When he looked back toward the window, his eyes caught a faint figure in the field. Tall, thin, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, standing motionless among the rows of corn. He held his breath. The figure vanished the moment he rubbed his eyes, yet the feeling of being watched remained, heavy and oppressive. That night, the inn sank into thick silence. The footsteps returned along the hallway, heavy, steady. This time, Elliot no longer felt the instinctive fear. He opened the door, eyes scanning the empty corridor. Only the flickering light and the gust of wind carried a rustling sound, rhythmic, like invisible hands sweeping over the dry leaves outside the window. Elliot moved to the window, staring out at the field. The corn swayed, and the tall, thin figure with the straw hat appeared. He raised his camera and clicked. The flash lit the moment, revealing a dense darkness within the figure, with no eyes, no nose, no mouth. When the camera screen came back on, Elliot saw what froze his heart. In the dark background, dozens, maybe hundreds of shadowy figures, all wearing straw hats, standing upright, facing him. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just empty gazes fixed on him, as if trying to engulf his very existence. Elliot stepped back, heart pounding. One thing was clear: Harrow's End was not merely an abandoned town. It was a field of curses where lost souls lingered, waiting. And he, Granger, had walked straight into its inescapable spiral. Ay, Marie. The early morning mist still shrouded Harrow's End as Elliot left the inn, his eyes dark-rimmed and his body weary. He gripped his notebook and pen like the only lifeline he had, walking toward the old town hall, a low building with crumbling brick walls, moss-covered roof tiles, and wooden doors creaking as he pushed them open. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, sunlight filtering through grimy window panes. File shelves were stacked high, many books nearly rotted away. Elliot groped through them like a man seeking lost memories, hands trembling as he turned each brittle page. A 19th century land registry book made him freeze. One name stood out: Nathaniel Granger, the owner of a large tract of land in Harrow's End in 1897. A note beside it read, "Sold to associates, disappeared with family." Elliot read it over and over, heart hammering. Nathaniel, his distant ancestor, the man who had helped seize a betrayed farmer's land, sowing the seed of the curse. Another record, a local court transcript, stated, "Granger and Associates deny responsibility," beneath which, scrawled faintly in ink, were the chilling words, "Blood debt must be paid, harvest season after harvest season." Elliot's whole body shook. He realized that his family name was not just connected to the curse, it was its root. The town, the family, the harvest, everything seemed to be waiting for him. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. When he looked up, dry handprints appeared on the walls, dozens, hundreds, layered, all pointing toward where he sat. Faint, yet freshly imprinted, as if hundreds of invisible entities had pressed close from all sides. Elliot leapt up, tripping over a bookshelf. A stack of files fell, papers scattering into the air. Among them, he spotted an old photograph, the Granger family at the turn of the century. The man in the center was Nathaniel, tall and dark-eyed. Beside him, a boy of about 10, his face eerily like Elio's, eyes wide as if staring through the lens directly into the future. He let the photo drop, yet the sense of being watched lingered. Even with eyes closed, he could see those gazes piercing through space and time, a reminder that the curse was not merely a thing of the past. Stepping outside, Elliot drew a deep breath. The town lay silent, like a graveyard. Yet deep down, he understood. From now on, he was no longer an observer. He had become part of a century-old chain of cursed blood. And the straw-hatted figure, the harvest man, had noticed. Far across the field, the figure appeared. This time, Elliot no longer saw him as a stranger. In the shadowy outline, it reflected a part of himself. A cold reminder that past and present, the Granger family and the curse, were now inseparably entwined with Elliot's life. No. The third night in Harrow's End did not arrive with a familiar whistle of wind, but with a heavy silence, like a blanket pulled tightly over one's head. Elliot lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the darkness. No cars passed, no insects chirped, not even the faint rustle of the cornfields. Everything was still. The town seemed to have stopped breathing. Elliot dozed fitfully, tension coiling in his body, and the dream came. He found himself standing in the endless field, moonlight glinting off the dry corn stalks, turning them into shimmering blades. In the distance, a figure approached, Harvest Man. Slow, deliberate, the scythe in his hand cutting through the darkness. With each step he took, the rows of corn behind him silently collapsed, as if harvested clean. Elliot tried to turn and run, but his feet were rooted to the ground, heavy as stone. The face of Harvest Man, the same inky darkness he had seen in the photograph, absorbed the moonlight, swallowing even the air around it. Within that darkness, countless other faces appeared, old and young, all wearing straw hats, their eyes hollow, mouths whispering endlessly. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3 a.m. The room was icy, but what made Elliot shiver most was the smell, the scent of dry earth and rotting straw, thick as if the entire field had been dumped inside his room. Sitting up, he turned on the light and looked around. The bedspread was coated in pale brown dust, crumbled earth mixed with dry corn fibers. He checked his camera, but the screen was pitch black, even though the battery was full. When the flash briefly lit the room, he caught his reflection. Yet his eyes were empty, dark hollows gouged out of his face. The next day, Elliot wandered the town. Strange signs appeared everywhere. On brick walls, scrawled words, "It's harvest time." Clotheslines swayed in the wind, though no one lived there. The clatter of horse hooves echoed along the roadside, yet the street was empty, as if the sound came from a time long past. That evening, returning to the inn, the clerk remained silent, eyes vacant as he handed over the key. Elliot noticed his hands trembling slightly, as if holding something unbearably heavy. Sleep was impossible. Sitting by the window, gazing at the misty fields, Elliot saw the harvestman appear, motionless. Around him, dozens of other figures rose from the earth, silently turning toward him. No movement, no sound. Only hollow gazes, dense as if the entire field had become a pair of enormous eyes. Elliot sank deep into the chair, heart frozen. The curse was no longer just a story he had been told. It had spoken his name, and it would not stop until the Granger family debt was repaid or another heir was pulled into the endless nightmare. Oh, aye. The next morning, Elliot left the inn in a half-awake haze. The sky was gray, the dim light too weak to illuminate the empty streets clearly. He walked toward the old town hall, a low building with crumbling brick walls, moss-covered roof tiles, and wooden doors that creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, dust lay thick in the air, sunlight filtering through grimy window panes. Filer shelves were stacked high, many books nearly rotted away. Elliot groped through them like a man searching for his own memories, hands trembling as he turned pages brittle as ash. A 19th century land registry book made him freeze. One name stood out clearly: Nathaniel Granger, the owner of a large tract of land in Harrow's End in 1897. A note beside it read, "Sold to associates, disappeared with family." Elliot read it again and again, heart pounding. Nathaniel, his distant ancestor, the man who had helped seize a betrayed farmer's land, sowing the seed of the curse. He opened another file, a local court transcript, the handwriting shaky. Granger and associates deny responsibility. Below, another scrawl in faded ink. Blood debt must be paid. Harvest season after harvest season. Elliot collapsed into a dusty wooden chair, body trembling. He realized clearly, the Granger family was not merely linked to the curse, they were its root. The town had decayed along the cracks left by their ancestors. Suddenly, the room seemed to shrink. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. When he looked up, dozens, even hundreds of dry handprints appeared on the walls, layered one atop the other, all pointing toward where he sat. Faint, yet unmistakably fresh, as if an invisible crowd had pressed close from all directions. Elliot leapt up, falling against a bookshelf. Files scattered across the floor. Among the papers, he spotted an old photograph. The Granger family from the turn of the century. The man standing in the center was Nathaniel, dark-eyed. Beside him, a boy of about 10, face strikingly similar to Elio's, eyes wide, staring through the lens as if looking straight into the future. He let the photo drop, yet the sense of being watched lingered. Even with eyes closed, he could see those gazes, piercing through space and time, reminding him that the curse was not merely a thing of the past. Stepping outside the building, Elliot drew a deep breath. The town lay silent, like a graveyard. Yet deep inside, he knew, from now on, he was no longer an observer. He had become a link in the chain of cursed blood spanning over a century. Far across the field, the straw-hatted figure appeared again. This time, Elliot recognized him no longer as a stranger. Within the shadowy outline, he reflected a part of Elliot himself. A chilling reminder that past and present, the curse and the family, were now entwined with his life. The final night of the harvest descended on Harrow's End. Elliot sat in his room, the desk lamp casting a pale yellow light on his hollowed face. His eyelids felt unbearably heavy, yet he dared not close them. Outside, the wind shifted, no longer slipping quietly through the cracks, but blowing in relentless gusts, as if a crowd of invisible bodies breathed in unison. Suddenly, everything stopped. Silence so absolute that Elliot could hear the pounding of his own heart. The world seemed frozen in place. He stood and stepped into the hallway. No phantom footsteps echoed like the nights before. Only absolute emptiness, darkness swallowing every trace of light. He walked down the main street, past darkened houses and abandoned shops. Each footstep echoed, emphasizing the void. When he reached the edge of the cornfield, moonlight faintly illuminated thousands of dry stalks, unmoving. Elliot held his breath. A subtle movement occurred. The rows of corn bent in unison, as if swept by invisible scythes. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Harvest Man. Tall and thin, tattered straw hat atop his head, scythe gleaming like a shattered moon in his hand. He did not rush, only took slow, deliberate steps. But with each heartbeat, the distance between him and Elliot shrank. From either side of the field, dozens of other figures rose. Hundreds, all wearing straw hats, hollow eyes fixed on him, standing silently. No movement, no sound. Their presence was dense, pressing in, making Elliot feel as if an invisible crowd was swallowing him whole. Harvest Man stopped a few steps away. The wind kicked up dust and leaves in a whirlwind. Amid the storm, a voice rang out, not from a single mouth, but from hundreds at once, a chorus. It's harvest time. The debt must be paid. Elliot clutched his head, mind reeling. Images of Nathaniel Granger, the betraying ancestor, flashed before him. Then came the faces of Grangers across generations, one after another, linked by cursed blood. They pressed down on him, reminding him there was no escape. In the dust-laden wind, Elliot lifted his gaze to the darkness of Harvest Man. This time he saw clearly. The face was his own. Twisted eye sockets empty, skin cracked and dry like parched earth. A choked cry escaped, but the wind swallowed it instantly. Harrow's End dissolved behind him. Every house, every street fading like smoke. Only the field remained, the wind and the endless shadows. Elliot sensed one undeniable truth. The curse had recognized its successor. He was no longer an observer. He had become part of the eternal harvest, bound to Granger blood, whether he wanted it or not. The gray sky hung heavy. The wind whispered, and the field murmured again, waiting for the next season. Why? The St. Catherine's Sacred Heart Church in Kolkata is not only a place of worship, but also a dormitory for young nuns, girls who have renounced all worldly luxuries to serve God. After a few years of training, the nuns are sent to churches affiliated with the Sacred Heart Society. On the last Friday night of March, the prayer session took place in a solemn atmosphere. Mother Superior Agatha introduced a 23-year-old girl to the other nuns. "This is God's special child, Helena. She will dedicate her life to God. From now on, Helena will live with us." But Helena's face was cold and deeply sad. She did not make eye contact with anyone, and when she looked at people, she showed no emotion. As soon as Mother Agatha finished her introduction, Helena quietly went back to her room. It seemed that she was not used to this environment. A heavy atmosphere surrounded her, making the other nuns feel strange from the first moment. The next morning, as the prayer began, the young nun Rena noticed Helena standing silently behind, muttering something in a strange voice, sometimes like a man, sometimes like a child. Rena shivered, trying to listen but couldn't understand. Helena avoided all eyes, as if hiding something inside her. That night, when the other nuns slept, Rena peeked through Helena's window. The sight gave her goosebumps. Helena sitting on a chair, her body twisted, her limbs knotted, her neck tilted to one side like a living doll. Suddenly, Helena turned her neck towards Rena. Her eyes were deep black. Her hair was tangled. Her teeth were black as if burned. Rena screamed, alerting Mother Agatha and the other nuns. What happened? Mother Agatha ran over in a panic. Rena pointed towards Helena's room. Mother Agatha looked through the window and was also shocked. Mother Agatha held the cross in her hand and walked towards Helena. Helena jumped off the chair and landed on the ground and started growling at Mother Agatha like a wild animal and stared at her. Suddenly, the cross slipped from her hand and fell. Immediately after, Helena's eyes turned black. Helena's fingers snapped back with a cracking sound, and Helena, like a beast, jumped on Mother Agatha and chewed the flesh on her hand. Helena stood there like a demon, clutching the flesh in her mouth, and Mother Agatha writhed in pain. After the attack, Helena turned back and sat on the chair and started muttering something in a strange voice. The sound coming from Helena's mouth was as if 2 or 3 people were talking at the same time. Hearing the cry for help, Father Dominic, who lived in the church, also came and saw Mother Agatha's condition and took her out. Everyone was shocked to see Helena in such a state. An atmosphere of fear also spread to the other girls. Father Dominic, the priest of the church, realized that this was not a normal thing. The other nuns were advised to stay away from Helena's room. He sprinkled holy water around her body, but blisters appeared on her skin every time the holy water touched her, looking like acid burns. After a while, Helena woke up and looked much weaker than before, moaning in pain. She barely had enough strength in her body to sit up. Her face was completely withered. Her body seemed to have collapsed. Seeing Helena's condition, Mother Agatha laid her down on the bed in the room. "Oh my God, she looks so bad. Let her rest here. The holy water will heal her." The next 2 days passed in absolute silence. Helena lay in bed, not eating or drinking anything, not speaking at all. After 2 days, she asked for water in broken words. At her mother's insistence, Helena was given water. Helena now looked a little more normal. It seemed that whatever evil spirit had really left her was now gone. Seeing Helena in such a state, Mother Agatha gently stroked her head. "Do you want something to eat?" Helena nodded in agreement, and then, after many days, Helena ate her fill. She kept eating, as if she had been hungry for countless years. As time passed, Helena's eating speed and eating style changed. Helena's entire mouth was numb from eating. After eating, Helena began to look a little different. Once again, her eyes began to change, and she began to mumble in a strange language. She said, speaking in different languages. Whatever she was doing at the moment was beyond her control. Before anyone could do anything, Helena had returned to normal. It was as if she had no idea what had just happened. Helena's behavior was becoming more and more bizarre with each passing hour. Mother Agatha and Father Dominic realized that they had exceeded their ability to deal with Helena. Helena would have to stay here until Friday, after which only Father Edmund could do anything. After a few days, Helena became extremely violent, screaming and making many voices at the same time. 3 days later, on Friday, Father Edmund arrived, and late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, the exorcism began. The deliverance began. Helena was tied to a chair. Crosses and burning candles were placed around her, and she was sprinkled with holy water, and then Father Edmund began to chant the incantation. Helena's pupils darkened again. A devilish smile appeared on her face. Helena was speaking many languages at the same time. Sometimes a child's voice could be heard from her mouth, and sometimes a thunderous man's voice could be heard. As Father Edmund continued to chant the incantation, Helena seemed to be in a rage. Suddenly, Helena screamed loudly, and at the same time, all the candles around her went out simultaneously. And then Father Edmund saw the ground between the cross and Helena crack. Helena screamed in horror. Her screams became so loud that no one could bear it. Suddenly, Helena's body began to stiffen violently, and at the same time, Mother Agatha's eyes also turned pitch black. "Come on, leave me alone. I'll tell you. I'll tell you everything," Mother Agatha said in a scary voice. A year ago, Helena had experienced a tragic event. She was the victim of a family murder during an ancient ghost-worshipping ritual. At that time, an evil spirit and demon summoned from the ritual possessed Helena, causing her to be haunted since she was young. Helena was lucky to survive, but the demon spirit still followed her, making her always feel like someone was watching and emitting strange mumblings. Hearing this truth, everyone understood that guilt and despair were the reasons why the demons possessed Helena, and that she did not naturally become ferocious. Father Edmund continued the ritual, sprinkling holy water continuously, chanting the incantation. Helena screamed violently, her body stiffened, her eyes turned black, and a ghostly smile appeared. Every time the holy water touched her, blisters appeared, but the power of the incantation gradually suppressed the demonic force. Finally, Helena fell down, exhausted but still alive. Helena was taken to the hospital to recover. Her face and body were withered, but her soul was saved. Father Edmund said that this was the most important exorcism in the dormitory, and everyone who witnessed this event shuddered to remember it forever. St. Catherine's Church closed for a while to return to peace, but the memory of Helena and the demonic force that possessed her still haunted the nuns and priests, causing them to lose sleep every night. Helena continued to be closely monitored, and her story became a living horror legend in St. Catherine's dormitory. The pizza delivery man who scared him. This happened 5 years ago when I was 15. I was having a sleepover with friends during winter break. It was raining and the thunder was even louder than usual. I invited 5 of my closest friends. We had known each other since we were kids. Henry's uncle, Eric, came to watch us because my parents were on vacation and wouldn't be back for a few days. My 2 bulldogs were home too. Uncle Eric was a fun and easygoing guy, but not a pushover. He was professionally trained in martial arts and even trained MMA fighters. Everyone arrived that afternoon. I don't remember the exact time, but it was already pretty dark. Eric ordered pizza for everyone, and we decided to watch a horror movie. Honestly, it was the perfect night for such a movie. The stormy weather created a special atmosphere. Halfway through the movie, the doorbell rang. We assumed it was the pizza delivery guy, and Uncle Eric opened the door. He looked through the peephole and saw the delivery guy. He was about 6 feet tall, with a strange, unsettling expression. Uncle Eric said the guy gave him an immediate sense of unease. He opened the door, and the man handed him the pizza. There was no word, just a long, creepy smile. Uncle Eric paid and quickly slammed the door shut. We put that aside and continued watching the movie. When it ended, it was almost midnight. We all decided to sleep together in the large living room upstairs. Robert and I slept on the bed. The others spread sleeping bags on the floor. Then there was a noise on my shoulder. Robert was trying to wake me up. His face looked very worried. He whispered, "Did you hear that?" There was a knock on the window. At first, I thought it was thunder, but then Robert leaned in and said, "I think someone's trying to get in." My heart started pounding. We stared at the window, unmoving. The knocking stopped. Then a dark figure appeared just behind the glass. The person was wearing a black or gray hoodie. I couldn't see his face, just a silhouette, but it was so close, so scary. Adrenaline surged. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, locking it, just as the figure tried to push it open. That's when I saw it, a grin that revealed white, crooked teeth. I still couldn't see the rest of the face. I rushed back into the room and shook everyone awake. Then the knocking started again, louder, more intense. He started yelling something, but the words didn't make any sense, like my brain couldn't process them. We ran straight down the stairs to wake Uncle Eric. Uncle Eric didn't hesitate. He took my 2 dogs and went outside. We followed. What we saw was disturbing. There was a ladder leaning against the wall of the house, right below our bedroom window. The knocking sound was the ladder hitting the wall as the man climbed up. Uncle Eric spotted muddy footprints leading to the backyard. He ran in that direction. That's when we saw him. The man was hiding under a bush in the yard, trying to hide. Uncle Eric lunged at him, with 2 dogs barking loudly beside him. The 2 dogs lunged forward, biting the man's hoodie, and Uncle Eric punched him hard and fast. "Call the police!" he yelled. We did. The police took a while to arrive because of the storm. When they finally arrived, they arrested the man. And then came the part that will haunt me forever. The officers told us this wasn't the first time he'd done this. And Uncle Eric, he swears it was the guy who delivered our pizza earlier that evening. I've never let my guard down since. And my dogs, they sleep in my room every night. Hi, my name is Andy. I come from a country in West Africa, and I have a horror story that happened when I was 6 years old. Back then, I lived in a small apartment with my parents. It was a quiet building, and I had no friends to play with. There were no kids my age around, so my parents hired a babysitter to take care of me when they were busy. One day, I told the babysitter that I wanted to go outside the building to play. She agreed, and we went outside together. Right next to my apartment building was a small house made entirely of wood. And that's where I saw them, a group of kids playing right outside the wooden house. I was so excited and asked the babysitter if I could join them. She said yes. So I ran over and started playing with them. They were a little older than me, and I remember that they were all siblings. At one point, the oldest girl in the group said that she had to cook. I was curious and asked, "Can I help you?" She smiled and said, "Sure." Then she told me to go and collect some small rocks and some big rocks. I didn't ask any questions, I just did it. She brought out a big pot, put it on the stove, and started putting the rocks I had collected into the pot. At first, I was confused. I wondered, what's going on? She covered the pot and waited. After a few minutes, she opened it, and that's when I saw it. Inside the pot were rice and meat, cooked, hot, ready to eat. The same pot that had been full of rocks a few minutes ago. I was shocked, but also amazed. I didn't understand how she could turn rocks into food. I remember thinking that it must be some kind of black magic. Then she invited me to eat with her and her siblings, and I almost said yes. I was young, I was naive, and the food smelled delicious. But at that moment, my babysitter, who was sitting a short distance away, realized what was happening. She ran over and shouted, "Don't eat that!" She grabbed my hand and pulled me away. We walked straight home. She didn't say anything on the way home. She just looked scared. I'm 16 now, and I still think about that day. What kind of magic did those kids use? What would happen if I ate that food? Since that experience, I don't like eating at other people's houses, because I've seen firsthand that not all meals are what they seem. I live in a Nordic country. Back then, I used to go for walks late at night. It was a pretty safe area, or at least it used to be. But then things started to get worse. There was more violent crime, mostly gangs. However, if you just mind your own business, you usually don't have any problems. One night, around midnight, I was walking. Up ahead, I saw a tall apartment building. There were two men walking back and forth around it. I recognized the building. An old teacher of mine lived there. She must be in her 50s now. I found it a little strange to see the two men hanging around the building, but I didn't think much of it. Until I realized that their actions were unusual. They were tiptoeing, peeking through the windows of the apartments. One of them even picked up a branch and walked across the yard. That's when I realized they were about to break in, and I, by accident, had walked right into the middle of it. They had noticed me. They stopped, turned, and stared straight at me. My instincts told me to move fast. I turned left to get away from there, but this path wasn't much safer. It led past a school and an empty lawn, completely deserted, with no people, no hiding places. I glanced back. At first, the two men had gone in another direction. But when I turned the last corner before the school, I spotted them again, hiding behind a bush, watching me, waiting. There was no way they were there by accident. If they didn't have any intentions, they wouldn't have followed me like that. I was almost home by then. I did the only thing I could think of. I took off my coat, held it up high as a decoy, and ran calmly home. Nothing happened. They didn't chase me. But I know I was very lucky that night. If I hadn't turned left, if I had just kept walking straight into the dark, they probably would have robbed me. I still take night walks now, but only for 10-15 minutes, and always walk close to buildings where someone might see me, just to be on the safe side.